Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In our previous video, we explored the simple linear regression using data of GDP, growth, and apartment vacancy rates. And we calculated the regression line and plotted the data in Excel. But an equation alone is not the end of the story. So now we want to interpret the data. The last time we fitted the line as per this equation, y is equal to minus 0.31 x plus 9.4, where x is GDP growth and y hat, this is actually a y hat, and y hat is the predicted vacancy rate. The negative slope tell us that higher GDP growth, as GDP increases, higher GDP growth is associated with lower vacancy. But to know whether this relationship is statistically meaningful, we need to look at regression statistics. Now let's go to, this was the regression data that came back from the Excel function. And we can see the multiple R of minus 0.53 measure the strength and direction of the linear relationship. This we calculated. So that means y is negative because as GDP increases, vacancy decreases. So it goes in opposite direction. The R square here is the square of the correlation coefficient. It measures the proportion of the total variation in vacancy rates that is explained by GDP growth. Here, R squared is approximately 0.28. That means that only 28% of the variation in vacancy rates is explained by GDP growth. 72% is due to other factors. And in our previous video, we mentioned that there are many other factors influencing vacancy rates. We said that it could be due to other macroeconomic factors, monetary policy, interest rates, number of apartments available, employment, salaries, migration, many other macroeconomic factors. So, and this is actually a proof. The adjusted R square accounts for the sample size and the number of predictors. Because we have a very small sample size, our sample size is only 1, 2, you see, it's only 9. 1, 2, if we select everything, we see, count 9 samples. Because we have a small sample size, R squared is lower than the regular R squared. The adjusted R squared is lower than the regular R squared. This warns us not to overstate the model power, explanatory power. The standard error is the standard deviation of the residuals, the typical amount by which actual vacancy rates differ from predicted values. Smaller values indicate a tighter fit, but this is on the higher side actually. So how do we interpret these values? This intercept here at 9.37, if we round up, estimates the vacancy rate when GDP growth is 0. So if we make this x 0, okay, this is the value of is an estimation of the vacancy rate when GDP goes to 0. And the slope, this is the slope, suggests that 1 percentage point increase in GDP growth is associated with a 0.31 point decrease in vacancy. However, the real question is this statistically significant? So if we look at the p-value here, the p-value of approximately 0.143 means there's a 14.3% chance of seeing a slope as extreme as ours if the true slope was 0. So since this p-value is larger than the common 5% threshold, and even larger than 10%, we cannot reject the null hypothesis. In other words, it is not strong enough to conclude that GDP growth has a statistically significant effect on vacancy. So our limitations are obviously a very small sample size. We have only 9 sample size. So our estimates can be imprecise, and a larger data set might produce different results. And R square is not a measure of importance. It tells us how much the model fits the data, but a high R square does not imply causation, nor does a low R square necessarily mean the model is useless. R square can be influenced by repeated measurements and outliers. So, conclusion in summary, our regression analysis reveals a moderate negative correlation. Moderate and negative correlation between GDP growth and vacancy rates. But the relationship is not statistically significant with this sample. R squared shows that most of the variation remains unexplained. Most of the variations, 72%, remains unexplained. Reminding us that the real world is influenced by many, many other factors. Okay, so I hope this explanation will be helpful. Thank you so much.